Welcome to the 2-Bit Game Club. It's like a book club for games. This month's game is Civilization for the Apple II computer from 1991. And this week's topic is how we can learn about history from Civilization. I'm your host, Liam Gallagher. I'm a composer and I'm a bassist. So, video games have the unique ability to expose us to ideas that you can get used to using well before you actually understand the ideas themselves. So as a kid, I didn't know what a phalanx was, what metallurgy meant. I thought it was actually pronounced metallurgy. Somehow that was a more reasonable explanation. Or why I would want to change my government from, say, despotism to monarchy. But gameplay in Civilization allowed me to manipulate these concepts, like in real time, and then watch them play out and interact with the results, without actually needing a firm understanding of what they meant. By childish reasoning alone, we can all figure out why guns are good at ending lives. But the logistical impact of the extensive system of railways and what that might have an impact on our war effort in general is a concept that's a little bit more complicated. You can start out with simply building rails everywhere because trains are cool, and we like trains because I was like 10 years old, and yay, trains. And then later discover the way that a network, or the infrastructure of railways, transformed defensive troop deployments. You know, as your enemies come pouring in, all of a sudden your infantry can be anywhere in the country in a flash, whereas before they had to hump it old-fashioned style across the continent. So through play, you've gained the concept of battlefield logistics, even if you didn't have a articulatable understanding of the things that you synthesize together to create that concept of battlefield logistics. Can you think of any historical concepts that you've learned through playing Civilization? Send your thoughts to patreon.com/2bitgameclub. So there's a historical context that becomes available through playing of the game Civilization. You may not learn about what actually happened in history, but you will get a big list of historical concepts to play around with. You might not learn the fact that the English used rapid industrialization to create a global empire upon which the sun never set, but you might discover yourself looking at a less technologically advanced neighbor and wondering, perhaps, only to yourself, that you might be more qualified to ruin their lands. And surely if they wanted to keep ruling their lands, wouldn't they protect them more? Is it not my responsibility as the more technologically advanced people to be the steward for these primitive peoples and usher them into a new age? Yeah, that sounds reasonable. So as a more modern player, you might decide that course of action, while perhaps understandable if you were in the position of the English back then, is immoral by our current concept of land ownership rights. But as you play, you'll still notice that were you so inclined, you could have stolen all your neighbor's land. That was an option that was available to you. Later, you might hear in the news how one nation is blockading another nation, preventing international aid organizations from, say, treating, cholera outbreak in their territory. And all of a sudden, your battlefield logistics light will go off in your head. You'll feel for the people whose lives are lost in the ensuing conflict, but you'll also be able to connect the dots on how one nation's network of logistics allowed it to blockade another. This, however, is not actually history. None of the events that take place in a game of Civilization have ever happened. Do you remember that time the Zulu stealth bombers blew up the Great Wall in the capital city of the Butt Empire, Poopton? You do not. If you've ever tried to rig up a scenario based on actual history, you'll notice that things aren't quite right. Turn lengths mean that a lot of time passes between each round, and potentially hundreds of years can go by while you try to march one army to another city. It's possible to alter the base rules of the game to better suit a recreation of a scenario so that the timescale plays out in a way that history actually did. But what if the die rolls don't match up with the historic events, and say Spartacus' slave army breaks Pompey's legions, on that 1 in 100 die roll, and then as a result they conquer Rome and burn to the ground? Yeah, where's that in your history books, huh? But in order to produce history with any accuracy in the game engine of Civilization, you have to make such significant alterations to the game system that it no longer really resembles the fresh installation of Civilization. Oh well. I come out on the favorable side of this debate about whether or not Civilization can teach you a thing or two about history, though. It's been said that education is not the filling of a bucket, but instead the torching of a barn. I think that's the expression. But I don't think Civilization actually really teaches you about history. I gained some vocabulary. Phalanx is a cool word, but that's not the same thing as, historical fact. But rather, I think the game's contribution, its gift, is that it gives you concepts you can start exploring. So in my case, that meant I got to play with ideas that later I would learn about in history class. And then when I was in class, I brought a level of interest to the topic that made learning about it exciting. It made the subject of history more relatable. So like in the case of Mediterranean politics in the ancient world, it stopped just being, movements of troops and people whose names were hard to pronounce. But, on a certain level, I could hear the stories of Julius Caesar and, kind of get where he was coming to, for I too had once been the emperor of Rome. All right, I've been your host, Liam Gallagher. Until next time, send your thoughts into patreon.com/2bitgameclub, because at the end of the month, we do a listener roundup. It's sort of our book club meeting. And I'll be answering questions that you guys, or just fielding thoughts you have about the game of Civilization from 1991.